I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the heads in the shot. 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Training camp is officially in the books for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Welcome back to another episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I am your host, Rhett Matthew. Joined alongside me, as always, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. We are back today live, breaking down some of the top stories and headlines from the final week of Tampa Bay Buccaneers training camp. The Miami Dolphins traveled to town for this week's set of joint practices in Tampa Bay ahead of their Friday night preseason matchup. Got a lot of great stories to talk about. Been a minute since we have talked to you about the Buccaneers, and believe it or not, quite a few things have happened since the last time we talked to you about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Before we dive into it, Evan, how you doing, my friend?
Doing pretty good. Just like you were kind of saying, before we started the show, this is the point, I think, of the preseason / training camp where you're kind of ready for it to be over. Like, you're kind of like, all right, like, we get the point, let's move on. And we're not quite there yet. We're almost there, right? But we're not quite there yet. Before you know it, we will be. But the home stretch now, truly the home stretch, before the actual thing, happens. But we will see how they fare on Friday night with the starters expected to play a little bit, not much. But real football is coming back sooner rather than later. It's just got to sort of churn through this last little bit here of, I guess it just, at some point, you want things to kind of matter, right? Like, you want the final score to matter. You want these games to be played with higher intensity, and we'll get that sooner rather than later for sure. So excited to get into it today, though.
Just imagine if we had a fourth preseason game. Good God.
I don't know how we did it when there was 4 preseason games.
So the starters expected to be in the game for Tampa Bay this week. First look all preseason at quarterback Baker Mayfield, guys like Mike Evans, running back Rachaad White, Chris Godwin potentially going to be getting some reps on Friday night as well. Todd Bowles talked to the media, said that we've just got to get some game action. We get some game action Friday and make sure the operation is going smoothly. Baker Mayfield, Liam Cohen, the offensive line, get some coordination, and then I will be satisfied. For the most part, everybody has been professional. Everybody has been working hard. The communication has been there. Now, it was kind of an up and down week as far as Bucs-Dolphins joint practice went. Seems like the Bucs fared better this week than they did last week up in Jacksonville. But the energy was something that was talked about, and I wanted to open up with this before we talk a little bit more about the Buccaneers starters. Multiple outlets seem to report that the energy for the Bucs just was not at the same level. Now, I don't want to say low energy. I don't want to put that label on it because you talk about Todd Bowles and you talk about low energy. I think those things go hand in hand, but that's a conversation in itself. But a lot of people were saying the Bucs' energy compared to Miami just wasn't on the same level. I don't know if it was because, Coach McDaniel was out there with his players, chest bumping guys, jumping up in the air and chest bumping Calais Campbell after he knocks down that big time pass at the line of scrimmage there. He's out there celebrating with his players. They're getting loud. They're getting vocal. And the Bucs just haven't really done that. Now, listen, August football does not matter. Training camp reps in the grand scheme of the NFL season don't seem to matter that much. But Evan, when you hear this many outlets reporting on this and talking about it, does this concern you at all when you compare Todd Bowles as a head coach and how he practices to Mike McDaniel as a head coach and how the Dolphins practice? Is this of any concern to you at all?
Not really. I mean, look, nobody really cared when Tony Dungy, right, wasn't the rah-rah guy, right? It worked. Levante David, one of the best players, one of the best Buccaneers of all time, has never really been a rah-rah guy. You don't have to be loud and boisterous, you don't have to be a John Gruden or a Bruce Arians, you can be a Todd Bowles, right? I think what matters is the results on the field. Now, in a month, A month from now, when we're in week 3, week 4, if they're still showing like they just do not care, right? That's a different story. Then you can have that conversation. But I think right now, just like we talked about, man, there's probably some of those players that are just kind of over it, right? Especially the starters, the guys who know they're going to be on the team, the guys who know they're going to have a role. You just kind of want to fast forward through all this, basically. I'm not saying they're not trying, right? And that's also not what you're saying. That's not what any of the media outlets that have, said that, per se. That's not what they're saying. They're not saying that the Buccaneers are out there just not even trying and this and that. But they're just saying that it just doesn't seem like they're all the way into it, which to me is kind of understandable. But you're getting into the dog days now, right? It's a weird time where you're almost there at the regular season where things are really going to start ramping up, but you're not there yet. And I think that sort of leads into the energy aspect. But no, I'm not really concerned. Like I said, come back to me, in a month or two, and if it's still an issue, then we can have a discussion about it. But right now, I wouldn't be too concerned.
Yeah, I think the tone of practices, especially this time of year when people are just fiending for football content, I think it's easy to overreact to some of these reports. But I'll never forget, when Bruce Arians first came to Tampa Bay in 2019, he set a different tone entirely for Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice. I mean, you want to talk about a boring practice. Before Bruce Arians came to town, the Bucs were playing music every single week, loud as hell. They had ping pong tables and other fun games in the locker room. They took all that shit out when BA came to town. And I remember him saying this. I don't remember why a lot of people don't seem to remember this about Bruce Arians, but he said the team was not allowed to have practice at music until they won something. In the the second year without music at practice, they go out and win a Super Bowl title. So does music at practice mean you're not a Super Bowl team? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think the tone of how certain coaches want to run their practice and expect their team to act when you're just trying to get better, I think it's easy to overreact to stuff like this. And again, when you compare the coaching style of McDaniel to a Todd Bowles, like we've had this discussion about Todd Bowles time and time and time and time again. Oh, he's boring. He's low energy. Okay. I mean, people don't care about that stuff when you're winning football games, plain and simple.
Yes.
You remember
if the Buccaneers win the NFC South again and make the playoffs, the discussion isn't going to be, well, yeah, they won the division again, but man, their coach is boring. Like who cares? Nobody's going to care.
Diving a little more into the Buccaneer starters this week, quarterback Baker Mayfield is in the news, clamoring some praise as well as talking to the media and setting some goals for himself and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2024. During a recent interview on SiriusXM NFL Radio, Buccaneers running back Rachaad White hinted at the possibility of Baker Mayfield playing more aggressively due to his improved physical condition. So he had a baby, showed up skinnier, and says he's still not satisfied after signing a 3-year, $75 million contract. Rachaad White said, quote, man, him coming in here just shaving weight, looking good, looking more explosive, making more plays outside the pocket and stuff like that. He's been awesome in extending plays. I mean, he looks like an action figure is what is being said about Baker Mayfield at the quarterback position. Baker also talked to SiriusXM this week, said, quote, I'm not satisfied with just having a job and getting extended. Winning the Super Bowl is still the ultimate goal for him and his teammates, which obviously is the goal for everyone every single year when you start an NFL season. But we know just how close the Bucs were last year. Went toe-to-toe with a pretty good Lions team. One game away from the NFC Championship game. I mean, if the Bucs can execute on that final drive of the game, we're potentially talking about them being one game away from the Super Bowl, which I don't think anyone on the planet expected them to be with Baker Mayfield as their quarterback, especially in Baker's first year in Tampa. So looking at Baker, we will get our first live look at him in some NFL action this Friday night against Miami. But that hype that all teams seem to get, that last minute publicity push, the positive media, we're hearing more and more about the Buccaneers setting their sights on a Super Bowl. We talked with Rock Riley about this a couple of months ago, but I'll ask you again, Evan, before the start of the season, is Baker Mayfield a quarterback that can take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to a Super Bowl? No pressure.
Well, first off, you are selling him a bit short here. He did not sign a 3-year, $75 million contract. It was a 3-year, $100 million contract.
Holy
So
hell,
even
excuse me.
more dollars, more pressure on Baker Mayfield, right? So look, here's the thing. And I understand, yeah, they were close to it, right? They were a lot closer than I expected, I think, than you expected, than most people expected. If you really truly thought that they were going to be one game away from the NFC title game headed into 2023, if like that was your expectation in August of 2023, I'm not sure how much truthful you're being, basically, right? Because I'm not sure there was just too many unknowns, right? You didn't know how a lot of the guys were going to be. They had a brand new offensive coordinator, brand new quarterback, a lot of rookies, a lot of younger guys. You just didn't know. So I think that was tough to navigate. They did a great job, right, of winning some clutch football games down the stretch when midseason it was looking like, all right, probably a lost year, right? After that Houston game, I remember I wrote an article for Bucs Nation. I said their season was over. I mean, I'll admit it, you can go back and find that article on Bucs Nation right now. I said that their season was done. It wasn't. They were able to get big wins against Atlanta and then against Green Bay and against Jacksonville. Those three wins down the stretch really helped them, and then it catapulted them. And did they play an Eagles team that was probably checked out by that point? Yeah, but it's still the playoffs, and that's still a playoff team, and that was an Eagles team that was in the Super Bowl the year before, and you were able to take care of business. And then you also go toe to toe with a Lions team. It's not like you got blown out, right? It's not like you got beat by 20 points in that game. You had a chance down the stretch. Unfortunately, you couldn't get the job done, but and then the Lions gave the 49ers a good scare, man. I remember the Lions were up in that game, and they couldn't hold on to the Lions that was made to the Super Bowl. Now, can Baker Mayfield, the question you asked, right? It's a long-winded answer. I get it. To me, you're going to find a lot of people. This is going to be a 50-50 answer, right? For a lot of people, because
yeah.
Baker Mayfield is one of those guys that is sort of a polarizing, decisive figure, right? Some people think he's really like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and then other thinks he's like the worst. Like there really isn't much in between. I like to believe that I am somewhat in between. Okay. I believe he is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? No, I do not. I've made that very clear here. But what a lot of people seem to ignore is that I also make it clear that I don't think Baker Mayfield is bad. I don't think he is. I was an advocate for signing him last offseason, right? I was before Brady came back for a retirement in 2022. I was an advocate for trading for Baker Mayfield in the first place. So Brandon in the chat said, I think he's the best in the NFC South. That's a close debate, I think. With a healthy Kirk Cousins, I think it's close. So we will see. Now, can Baker Mayfield win you a Super Bowl? In my opinion, probably not, unless things go the right way, right? Unless you have a roster around him. Is it impossible? No, I do not think it's impossible. I do not think it's impossible. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it doesn't matter what roster they have. They got that guy a quarterback, so it doesn't matter. I'm not going to say that. But just me speaking truthfully, I think that the roster around him would need to be good and like really good. And can that happen here? Sure, it can happen. Will it be in 2024? Maybe not, right? Like they still are counting on a lot of younger guys to keep developing and stuff, and that's okay. I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, can Baker Mayfield single-handedly win you a Super Bowl? I would lean probably not, but also there's only like a couple of guys in the entire NFL that I believe truly can. So It's not really that much of a slight on Mayfield.
Yeah, and if we're going to sit here and pick apart the reasons why the Bucs couldn't make a Super Bowl in 2024, Baker Mayfield's not anywhere near the top of that list, just because you look at this team, you look at the roster, and let's be honest, there's a couple of concerns that we both have headed into this season that I think could potentially limit the Bucs from becoming a Super Bowl contender in 2024. I think there's certain things that have to be better. But regarding Baker Mayfield and his ability, I like Baker a lot. I've really come around on Baker. I wanted to look at things with as critical as a lens as I could have to start that 2023 season. And I think we did. Like, I literally don't think I said on the podcast, I was not fully invested in Baker until after that Jacksonville game. I mean, after the Packers game,
and that was literally Christmas Eve,
right?
Like that game happened on Christmas Eve, so it was late.
Since then, beyond that point, not only did I come around to Baker Mayfield, but he exceeded all the expectations I had set for the team. I mean, not only Baker, the rest of the Bucs team, but they exceeded all of my expectations. And now this even goes up to the front office. They have continuously exceeded all of my expectations for these last 2 or 3 years. So to answer the question, can Baker Mayfield win a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say yes. I guess I'm just going to find myself somewhere in the middle like you are, but I find myself in the category of expect the unexpected because they have defied what my expectations were in the past. Baker's already done that during his time in Tampa. My expectations for him this season, kind of on the same baseline he had last year, new offensive coordinator. I'm not expecting any huge jump or development from him. We know what he is in the NFL, but I do think he can thrive with this team in Tampa. This is very long-winded for me to say, but I bring it all around to bring up this quote from Sean King, who is in the news this week, former co-host here on the Cannon Fire podcast, Buccaneers quarterback Sean King. He was on Cleveland-based Bullpen with Adam and the Bull last week, and he made it clear to say that Baker Mayfield can't win a Super Bowl, which was the assertion, or he made it clear to say that it's unfair to say that Baker Mayfield cannot win a Super Bowl, which was the assertion of the host. The quote from Sean King said, "I would put Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield's talent level on par with each other, and Brock Purdy took San Francisco to the Super Bowl last year. And you can make a legit argument that San Francisco probably should have won that game." So Sean King says that Baker Mayfield, when you compare him to the rest of the quarterbacks around the NFL, he is on par with a guy like Brock Purdy. And we were just talking about how, maybe this roster has to be a little bit better in Tampa for Baker to be a Super Bowl quarterback. But Evan, to further the conversation, for the sake of the conversation, if you took Baker Mayfield, threw him on the 49ers roster, do they make it as far as they did potentially further last year?
I actually think they do. Because look, like that's what I'm talking about. Like that's the type of roster that I'm talking about. The 49ers have had one of the best defenses in the NFL over the last few seasons. Their receiving core, with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk is great. I'm not saying the one in Tampa isn't great, but the 49ers have a guy named Christian McCaffrey and the Bucs don't. That helps. And also, I mean, Kyle Shanahan as a play caller, right? And as a scheme and a system. So, just like Bandwagoner says, they almost made it with Jimmy G as well, right? So I do think, and I think Baker Mayfield's better than Jimmy Garoppolo. So I do think, they would have maybe gotten there with Baker Mayfield. And I actually agree with Sean King that pure talent, if you're talking about pure talent, I think it is pretty close. I think it is pretty close in terms of pure just talent between Purdy and Mayfield. Now, I'm also not the biggest Brock Purdy guy, so you might run into somebody else who thinks Brock Purdy is fantastic, and they would scoff at that question. But it is what it is. I did want to say one thing before we move on, though. The difference, right? Can Baker Mayfield win a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers? Can Baker Mayfield win the Buccaneers a Super Bowl? That's two different questions. Yeah. Winning a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers is like Brad Johnson won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
Brad Johnson didn't win the Buccaneers a Super Bowl, right? So can Baker Mayfield win a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers? If their roster was good enough, sure. I think it's possible. Right? I do think it's possible. Can Baker Mayfield win the Buccaneers a Super Bowl? I would lean probably not. And like I said, that's okay because I think there's probably maybe 4 or 5 quarterbacks in the entire NFL that I believe can win you a Super Bowl.
Yeah, they are very rare. And, I think it's important that you make that distinction because a lot of people are going to hear that and they're going to get their feelings hurt. But it's like, listen, dude, you have to understand that there's only a handful of guys, like you said, maybe 3 or 4 in the NFL that can be put at that level. And it takes a lot. It takes a shit ton to reach that point. So,
and also, and they need good rosters too. Like I mean, the rosters around them has to be. Josh Allen is a fantastic quarterback. The Bills roster hasn't been good enough. Like it's just it hasn't been good enough. The Chiefs have made it work. The Chiefs are one of the few teams because Mahomes is just that special.
Yeah.
Brady in the 2000s and the 2010s was just that special that it didn't really matter what roster New England had, right? They were always going to be in the mix.
Yeah.
Even like a
third string janitor starting for him in December and January.
It doesn't matter. I mean, they won a Super Bowl with like Chris Hogan, dude. Like, come on. He was a lacrosse player. Like, give me a break.
As if they didn't mention that 50 times on the broadcast at the time, too. I remember that. Every time Chris Hogan was on the screen. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right, let's get into some injuries this week before we dive a little bit more into the Buccaneer starters. This is a write-up from Pewter Report, courtesy of Bailey Adams. I just wanted to read it because literally all the meat and potatoes right there for you. So a perfect write-up. Wanted to make sure we give credit there. But going back into Bucs participants in practice this week, some of the guys not practicing in Wednesday's practice are kind of the same as it has been as of late.
Not sure. Can't hear you, Rhett. Not sure.
Hello? Check 1, 2.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I
This is live. This is live, folks.
Yeah, this is the beauty of doing it. My audio says I'm through loud and clear. Check 1, 2.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
I just had to unmute.
That's live podcasting for you guys.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. All right, so let's start this over. The group of Bucs not participating in Wednesday's practice was generally the same as it has been of late. Justin Skule at the offensive tackle position, Christian Izien, the nickel corner, safety, Kayvon Merriweather at the safety room, Yaya Diaby, Raheem Jarrett, Tyreek Funderburk, Jordan Whitehead, and John Walford were among those sidelined for the joint practice with the Dolphins. However, there were a few positive signs for Tampa Bay on the injury front, and this is where we can talk about looking forward to some of these guys making their return in time for Week 1 against the Commanders. Jordan Whitehead, who has been sidelined with a quad injury since late July, once again went through stretches with the team this week before doing some running off to the side during practice. He looked to be moving well and appears on track, as expected, to be ready for the Bucs Week 1 matchup against the Commies on September 8th. Defensive tackle Greg Gaines returned to practice after missing the last 2 days. Inside linebacker Servassier Dennis was still in a black no-contact jersey for Wednesday's practice, but rookie tight end Devin Culp was not, as he returned to full participation and was back to work in full 11-on-11. As for Tyreek Funderburk, he was no longer wearing a boot on his foot, which is a positive step forward for the rookie cornerback. Now, the biggest injury news of the week is on the defensive line, and that is the return of Calijah Kancey. After the Bucs returned from Jacksonville, Calijah Kancey returned to practice on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Tuesday's practice was a big one for him as he recorded a sack in 11-on-11. He also looked good in several one-on-one drills against Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive linemen. Would love to see him make his preseason debut this week. We're talking about valuable reps for Calijah Kancey, a guy who missed the entirety of the preseason last year, was just good enough to go for Week 1, came in Week 1 against the Vikings, made a huge play in the backfield, and then was not able to go until Week 6 because he re-aggravated that injury. Now, he's getting a chance to possibly play in his first NFL career preseason game Friday night against the Dolphins, but having him ready to go for Week 1, and not just having him ready to go, but like the ability to get some of these last-minute reps, that's huge for a guy like Kancey.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's what made his rookie season kind of even more impressive to me, is this is a guy who didn't have a preseason, didn't have a training camp, basically. So that made it even more impressive for me for to watch Kancey's development and everything. So yeah, it would be cool, to see. It's kind of crazy that technically he hasn't played in the preseason game yet, and we'll see if he's able to go out there Friday night. If he does, we'll see how much he plays. You never know with those things, but we will have to wait and see. Wait and see about that. I hope he does play. I do hope he's out there because you'd like to see it, especially with a lot of the questions that the Buccaneers are going to have up front, specifically on the defensive line. So I think you're going to want to see how he looks because he's an important piece, not just for the present, but also for the future. So it's kind of both of those things there. And I am very curious to see if he plays, how long he plays and how he plays.
Yeah, all training camp reps are valuable too, but I think the fact he was able to suit up and practice against Miami this week, got 4 or 5 full days of padded practice, just out there working with your hand in the dirt. You get a lot of variety going up against another team. You get a look at different offensive fronts, different offensive linemen. Miami was moving some different guys around, so he was working against a lot of different people, and it's valuable because, again, you talk about the production that he had last season with no preseason at all. I'm excited to see what this kid can do. Kalijah Kancey, one of those guys along that defensive line that I am very excited to watch. Yaya Diaby, another one as well. Probably won't see him in that game Friday night, but the Bucs the Bucs expect to have him ready to go for week 1 against the Commanders. Let's talk about the other side of the football here. Some definitive moves being made, and I guess we'll keep the conversation on the trenches here, but Graham Barton officially named your starting center for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and as of right now, this is what your 2024 offensive line will look like for the Bucs. Starting at left tackle, Tristan Wirfs. At left guard, Ben Bredeson winning that job. Graham Barton, your starting center. Cody Malk, the second-year player, your starting right guard. And Luke Gedeke, who is, I don't want to say had a quiet camp because he's an offensive lineman. Like, it's not like you hear it.
That's good.
Yeah, it is good. But I think it's even better to hear about the development and the progress that this guy has made since his time in the league. We know that he had a really rough rookie season, made that transition to right tackle in 2023, played well, and now has aspirations to play just as good, if not better, than a guy like Tristan Wirfs. I mean, that's a lot to live up to, but the fact that he has just been quietly progressing, getting better, looking better year after year, the Bucs seem to be very excited about Luke Gedeke at the right tackle spot.
Yeah, and look, I mean, he's an important piece. If you're able to have your 2 tackles locked down for a long time, I mean, it helps a lot of stuff, right? It helps a lot in terms of not just your offense, but in terms of team development, right? Because tackles are a wanted commodity basically in the NFL. And to have 2 good ones is pretty rare. So I think you'd wanna be able to lock him up long term if he continues to develop this way, right? His rookie season was not good, but he was playing guard. They moved him to a more natural position, a right tackle, and his second year was pretty good. So we'll have to see how his second year right tackle fares. Does he hit a little bit of a wall? Does he continue to develop? So he'll be one of the guys I'm interested to see. But like you said, I mean, Barton winning the job, not a surprise. Ben Bredeson winning the job. Then Suopeta went down. Not a surprise. Elijah Klein has impressed in the preseason. He has played 2 pretty solid football games. So I do wonder how long Bredeson's leash is. Let's say, first 4 or 5 games he goes out there and he's kind of struggling. I do wonder if they make a switch to a guy like Elijah Klein to see what he has. Like I said, not saying it's going to happen, just kind of wonder that because Elijah Klein has really impressed me in this preseason. So we'll have to wait and see for that. But yeah, I mean, not many surprises along the Bucs offensive line, especially with what, like I said, once Suopeta went down, that competition was basically over. The Graham Barton versus Robert Hainsey thing was never really a competition. I mean, Barton would have had to be pretty bad for Hainsey to be a starting center. And if Barton was that bad, we'd be talking about something else right now. We'd be talking about something much more concerning rather than that. But yeah, no real surprises. But there is your 2020, at least to start week 1, there is your 2024-25 Buccaneers starting offensive line.
Now, on the conversation of depth, wanted to ask you about Robert Hainsey really quick. It's important to note that when you look at the training camp, the preseason that he had, he wasn't getting any reps at all at guard. I was talking about coming into this preseason after drafting Graham Barton. I kind of expected Hainsey to get kicked back over to that guard spot. He's played there before. He's shown that he can be versatile in this Buccaneers offensive line, but he was basically your center too. Now, Todd Bowles talked about how Hainsey does have the ability to play in a couple of different spots, and that might be what they ask him to do throughout the regular season, but your thoughts on him just mostly sticking to center work, didn't really get many guard reps.
Yeah, I mean, he can play it, right? It's not like he can't play it, but I like the idea, of having him sort of as a guy who can be there in both spots. Like I know he can play guard. Like I know he can play center. So I think it's good depth to have. And in case of emergency, God forbid something happens to Grant Barton or any of the guard spots there, I think Hainsey could step in. Now, the interesting thing would be, let's say, all right, Barton's healthy, playing well, and one of the guards goes down. Okay, is it Elijah Klein or do they try Robert Hainsey? That would be the interesting thing to me. Or are they going to try Robert Hainsey out of that spot, or are they just saying, look, like he is like the backup center? Yeah. I personally would probably try him out at guard because I'm a believer in like Robert Hainsey's probably so you have the starting five. Hainsey's probably your sixth best offensive lineman then. If you believe that these starting five are your five best offensive linemen, Hainsey's probably six. So I'm just a big believer in putting your best possible five, unless one of the tackle, like a Tristan Wirfs or a Luke Gedeke go down. Okay, then you can't have Robert Hainsey playing tackle. But I'm a believer in having your best five out there, right? So, and I actually think Robert Hainsey's probably better than Ben Bredeson. Maybe not by much, but I think he's probably better. So, they clearly see Hainsey though as a center, and it's like I said, it makes for good depth basically. So, it is a little bit surprising that he didn't really get any work at all in the games or training camp, really for that matter, at guard. But I think the Bucs sort of know what they have with him at either position. So I think that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and as you had brought up, I think it's just a definitive answer for that fail-safe option. If Barton goes down and you're looking at depth at center, well, if Hainsey's not there, who do you have? I mean, Robert Hainsey started as a center for this Buccaneers team for multiple seasons, so it's like you gotta kind of, I guess, expect that in that sense. When the Buccaneers look at him and they say, hey, he's best fit as a center, regardless of if we need him now or later, just be thankful that he's there, especially with the depth questions that still surround a little bit of this offensive line. But regarding the O-line, they're weak at practice. A lot of good work this week. Both of the tackles, good work against Chop Robinson. He didn't have a lot going on. I think he made one impressive play against Tristan Wirfs, but for the most part, T. Wirfs and Gedeke were putting him in the dirt. Cody Mauch had a stand-up rep this week against NFL vet Calais Campbell, who I think is now the longest tenured player in the NFL, like league-wide. I think Calais Campbell is the oldest.
Not 100% sure. If you want to be honest, like I didn't even know he was on the Dolphins. Until this past week, I didn't know. Like
he just pops up everywhere.
Yeah, good for him. He's a guy I've always wanted in Tampa, and it probably not going to happen, right? Because it's probably past that point. Probably, I would imagine he only has this year or potentially next year in the NFL. But he's always been a fun player. But I mean, look, it is good to see. Obviously, the Dolphins are banged up in the pass rush area too, right? The Dolphins are really banged up. Bradley Chubb still getting there. Jalen Phillips still getting there as well. So two of their top pass rushers basically aren't out there right now, but still is good to see.
Yeah, and just on a side note, I'm kind of excited to see Jalen Phillips find his way back into this Miami Dolphins defensive line. He's doing
good,
great
man.
things.
He is good.
Yeah, he's a really good player. By the way, Calais Campbell, second round pick by the Arizona Cardinals. What year?
Let's think here. Well, if he's
he's 30. I don't want. It's going to give it away if I say.
All right, yeah. Don't tell me.
I think he is. We'll look it up. We'll confirm for sure. But I think he is far and away the oldest NFL active player.
He can't be. Oh, okay. 2004.
Oh, holy shit! No, not quite that long. 2008. Which
okay,
still,
then he's not because Rodgers was drafted in 2005.
Jason Peters still the oldest active player in the NFL at 41 years old. I kind of forgot about that.
Jason Peters what team does he play for?
Let me see. Ranking the oldest NFL players in 2024. I don't know why they put Jason Peters on here. Jason Peters is
not
the
on a team
player
that shouldn't count.
Yeah, that's fair. For years, it was Tom Brady, the oldest player, but with the legendary quarterback retiring following the 22 season, there is a new oldest player for 2024 as of the preseason. Oh, it is Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Okay, so I was off by a couple of players, but I'm not very far off. So Calais Campbell celebrated.
He's still old dude.
He's still old as hell. He celebrated a birthday this month.
plays a much more violent position. I mean, defensive line, your hands in the dirt every play. It's tough to do for a long time.
I think that's the most surprising part of it. 37 years old, a 16-year NFL career with a hand in the dirt, and he's been good. Like even as he's gotten older, he hasn't been as high impact plays, but he's still making plays. He jumped up, batted a pass down at the line of scrimmage this week.
Because he's 6'8" or whatever. Don't worry. Will Golston will get there soon.
Definitely still useful. Aaron Rodgers being the oldest player at 40 years old. Mercedes Lewis on the Bears still active at 40 years old. Holy hell. Matt Prater for the Rams, 39 years old. Nick Folk for the Titans, 39 years old. Buccaneers legend Nick Folk. Joe Flacco, 39 years old for the Colts. J.J. Jansen, John Weeks, and Thomas Morstead rounding it out for the Jets at 38 years old.
Wow, this conversation is going off the rails.
Yeah, that one kind of got away from us. But I had to know. It's one of those things where it was going to bug me if we didn't figure it out.
All right, there is a little bit of discussion here. We were planning on talking about this at some point, so I figured now would be a good time to talk about it, since there has been a discussion in the chat about the wide receivers and about who they could potentially keep. Obviously, we know Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, Jalen McMillan. Those four, they're safe. That's nothing's gonna happen there. So you got four there for sure. Then you got a couple of guys that Cody Thompson has been really good. Raheem Jarrett was decent in Cincinnati, didn't play against Jacksonville. And then you got a guy like a veteran like Sterling Shepard. I mean, Christopher Cole asked in the chat, should they keep 7 wide receivers, the top 5, and Jarrett and Thompson? I think he's assuming Sterling Shepard's in one of those top 5, and not sure if he should be assuming that anymore.
Yeah, well, don't forget Cameron Johnson, the undrafted free agent from Barton College. He's already, I think at this point in the preseason, done enough to make the team. As of right now, just off of what we've seen in practices and preseason, he is the number 1 kickoff and punt returner for the team, and he's had a pretty good preseason as well. Cameron Johnson is a name that we have talked about quite a few times, but I think when you're starting to fight for a roster spot, special teams availability seems like a very good argument to keep this guy around, especially if he seems to be...
That's a big tiebreaker.
Yeah.
That's a big tiebreaker.
Because aside from Cameron Johnson, we've seen the Bucs try. I think Cody Thompson got a couple of reps back there. Sean Tucker was your kick returner for a little while. I don't think the Bucs have had a solid kick returner in a while. They've tried to draft a few. We tried with like a Jalen Darden. They've tried before, but now when you're in this situation where this team doesn't have any returners and you're carving out a role for yourself on a team that already has a ton of really good wide receivers, I do think it makes that conversation about Sterling Shepard a lot more interesting, because we wanted to assume that he's a veteran, he's going to get a chance to play and make this team, but with as good as these young guys have been, maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, maybe. And it's not really a slight on Shepard. It's not. It's just
he just hasn't
these
been
guys
available.
are stepping up. Yeah, it's just these guys are stepping, and he hasn't played. Like he hasn't been healthy. So he was a late addition. It's just maybe, that's all we're saying is maybe don't be shocked.
Right.
Not saying he's going to be, but don't be like stunned if Sterling Shepard does not make this team because of guys like Cameron Johnson, Cody Thompson, Raheem Jarrett, who, in the Bucs, maybe they try and sneak one of those guys on the practice squad, right? That's possible. Yeah. That's always a risk, right? Because they go through waivers and they are available to all 31 other teams. But if you really like a guy, I would suggest you just find a way to keep him on your 53-man roster. So should they keep 7 wide receivers? I don't know. Will they? That's tough, because it really depends on where else do you want to allocate your resources, basically, right? Where do you want to, where are you going to make this? If you have 7 wide receivers, where are you going to make the sacrifice elsewhere, right? Or, Bat W mentions, are you going to have 3 running backs and 3 tight ends? Like, if you do that, then you could theoretically probably do 7 wide receivers. Is that the best allocation of the resources, though? Right? Is only having 3 running backs and 3 tight ends, but 7 wide receivers? How much does that help you? Right? So I think that's what you really have to look at, and we'll get our answer here soon. Shortly after that, the final preseason game, which we're recording this Thursday, the preseason game is tomorrow. You're going to be seeing some cuts come down the pipeline over the next probably 48 to 72 hours after that game. So we'll get our answer soon enough on what they decide to do there.
Yeah, starting on Saturday, the Bucs will have to trim their roster down to 53 players. They'll go from 90 to 53. A lot of those guys that you're going to see released, you talked about some of the bubble players. If there's a name that surprises you, don't be surprised to see them back on the practice squad for Tampa Bay. Talking about the quarterbacks really quickly before we wrap things up with some players to watch here. Seems like for Friday night, John Wolford didn't get a lot of work in this week, still dealing with that rib injury after the hit that he took against Jacksonville. So my assumption, we haven't heard it officially from Todd Bowles, I don't believe, but my assumption Friday night is Baker Mayfield going to start this game. Kyle Trask going to bring us home. How much does this game mean for Kyle Trask, who has seemingly won the QB2 job after Wolford's injury?
It would be the last time you see Kyle Trask in an actual game for the Buccaneers. I mean, talking about a guy who's not under contract for 2025, and I mean, could very well be it. So, any of you, Florida Gators fans out there that are, really hyped to see Kyle Trask, and again, I don't know how much the starter's going to play on Friday. I wouldn't expect a ton. I mean, I do think you'll see him. I wouldn't expect a lot. So, you have to wait and see, I guess. But they haven't added a quarterback, and based on Bowles' comments, I figured Wolford would be fine, for that. Bat W says Wolford will be back on the practice squad. I don't see them cutting John Wolford. I would think they would keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. I would be surprised if they only rolled with 2 quarterbacks on the roster. So, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. We'll have to wait and see how much Trask plays, right? If Mayfield only gets 1 drive, is it, hey, this is it? Is this your game, or does Mayfield play a little bit more than expected? Who knows, right? So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But this could be it for Kyle Trask, for the Kyle Trask fans in Tampa Bay.
How long do you think we see the starters play? Todd Bowles has kind of had this agenda before where Week 3 is really when we see the biggest chunk of starters that we're going to get, but sometimes it's been a quarter, sometimes it's been almost a half, sometimes it's just 2 series if he sees what he needs to see from the offense. If they come out, they're running the ball well. I guess I kind of just answered my own question.
Yeah.
I feel like it ultimately depends on the execution of the starters.
Yes.
If Baker Mayfield comes out and has a drive like Joe Burrow did in Cincinnati, then it could be the only drive he has, yeah.
Yeah, I think that depends on that. Assuming things don't go crazy good or crazy bad, I would say probably a quarter. Yeah. I would guess probably a quarter, and that goes for the defense as well. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm not 100% sure, but again, like you said, I think it does depend on how well they play. That's what that depends on. So it's kind of tough to answer that right now, but I would say if all things are equal, I would guess probably around a quarter. I don't think you'll see them much more than that.
We will wrap it up with some players to watch. I don't think I can pick a singular guy out of this group just because it seems like they didn't have the best of weeks. But this Buccaneers secondary, Zion McCollum did make a couple of plays, intercepted one of Tua's first pass attempts on Wednesday during 11-on-11, made a couple of other big-time plays, big-time pass deflections. But other than that, it wasn't as bad as it was in Jacksonville seemingly, but it sounds like there were plenty of plays made by both of the offenses. So I don't think either secondary fared very well. But when you also look at the ammunition the Dolphins had, it may not have even really been that much of a test for the Bucs this week, and especially when you hear about them getting torched. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and OBJ, none of those guys practiced for Miami. So I don't know which route runners were out there tearing us up. Braxton Berrios was one of them. And remember a couple of years ago in that game against the Jets, he was tearing us up too. The Bucs don't have an answer for Braxton Berrios, the wide receiver blueprint that he has. But when you look at the secondary, are there any guys that you're going to be watching extra close on Friday night that, some of these bubble players we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, a guy like Keon Isaac, I think, who's had a pretty good camp, two good preseason games. So I could keep an eye on him, sort of the back end of that cornerback room. A guy who could, theoretically, make the roster, made the roster last year in a similar fashion. So he would be a guy to look at. Tyke Smith, obviously the rookie, keep an eye on him, seeing how he looks. And I mean, Zion McCollum too. It's funny how, he has a bad practice in Jacksonville and everybody goes nuts on Twitter and, oh, Zion McCollum sucks and this isn't going to work and this and that. And McCollum's never been this. He's never been that. Has a decent practice against Miami and you hear crickets. So it's really one-sided when it comes to the Zion McCollum discussion. And I don't think it should be that way. And I think you should just wait and see how it plays out with Zion McCollum. But he's another guy I'll be keeping an eye on as far as the secondary goes.
Now, on the other side of the football here, I know we've talked a lot about the starters, so I don't think there's anyone we really have to keep an eye on. The wide receiver room is obviously going to be a ton of fun to watch as well, but as this game goes on, are there any other players you can think of who have to have a big game? A lot of the guys this preseason that we've talked about who needed to step up, Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez, I know they're on that defensive line, but two guys who I think did enough this preseason to earn themselves a spot on the team. Is there anyone else that you can think of headed into this game in that same situation?
Yeah, I mean, you could look at Devin Culp, Kieft. You could look at those two guys. They're sort of battling for one of those final tight end spots. They're guys that, especially Culp, who I think there's a little bit more pass catch potential there than Kieft. So you kind of know what Kieft is at this point. So I think he's a guy who could maybe be competing for that spot. So he could use a nice game on Friday night. I mean, Cody Thompson, again, could use another nice game to sort of solidify himself, right? A guy like Cody Thompson's spot is not guaranteed, even like a Cameron Johnson. Those guys' spots are not guaranteed. One really bad game could put them down even further than they are up right now. So we'll have to wait and see about that. Like you said, we talked a lot about the starters. A lot of the starters, like, okay, you can mention, Jalen McMillan. Like we talked about McMillan plenty, like you sort of know, like he's not going to be able to be a guy. Obviously, his job isn't on the line. His spot isn't in question. You'd like to see him make some plays, but it's not like, critical for him to go out there and tear it up on Friday night. So I would think that it'd be either, a guy like Devin Culp, a guy like O'Keefe battling for one of them spots. And I would have said Sean Tucker, but Sean Tucker's pretty much locked down, especially with Chase Edmonds not really playing. Sean Tucker's locked down the basically the running back 3/running back 4 spot. I mean, unless they think Edmonds is ready for week 1 and they're going to carry 3 running backs and they just don't really like what Tucker brings to the table, I guess they could release him. But in which case, another strong performance by Tucker would help him. But I don't really see that happening. So I think Sean Tucker's spot's safe. And he's earned it because he's been pretty good for 2 straight weeks here.
Yeah, we continue to mention guys who have carved themselves out a spot on the team. I think Sean Tucker has done more than enough. I was a fan of him early in the season last year, and then he kind of faded into obscurity. The Bucs didn't have very many plans for him after the early going of the season in 2023, but he's come back with a vengeance this preseason. He's won over a lot of new fans. I think a lot of people who were not familiar with his game, and I'm expecting him to continue to play well as this game goes on against Miami. We'll wrap it up with this. What do I want to see from the starters against Miami? Really, the starting offense here. I know that it's an easy cop-out answer to say, I want to see a touchdown, so I'm not going to say that. But I would like to see the starting offense just start quickly, efficiently move the football, and I think, the biggest tell of that is going to be how effectively they can run the football in the early going, because we know that Bucky Irving has been a favorite target. Both Sean Tucker, Bucky Irving had a couple of big runs this week against Miami when they were available. So I'm expecting Bucky Irving. Maybe we'll see a little bit of Rachaad White for sure, but I just want to see this offense find themselves in a rhythm where they are moving the football. Even if it doesn't end up in points, just moving the football. Maybe some pre-snap motion, right? I think going back to what Todd Bowles had said about what he wants to see, want to see some action, want to see some game action, want to make sure the operation is going smoothly, make sure the communication is there between Baker, Liam, the offensive line, get some coordination going on the offensive side of the ball. But I think the run game is the catalyst for all of it. We know Baker Mayfield can avoid pressure in the pocket. We know that he can throw the football if he has a clean pocket or if he's protected long enough. We know that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin can be over 1,000-yard receivers. We know that Rachaad White can step up here and there when he needs to so far. We don't know for sure. in the regular season if Bucky Irving can be a force for this team. But I think that all of those things, everything that the Buccaneers do well on the offense this year is going to be amplified by the run game. If you do not have a good run game, I mean, the Bucs haven't had a good run game in a couple of years, but we're trying to build something here, and that's what I want to see. I want to see this run game show up and just look like it is a cohesive part of this offense. I don't want the offensive drive to stall out when they start running the football.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to look at it. I would think for me, just execution. Like you said, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to go out there and march down the field in 10 plays and score a touchdown. I don't need that. Would it be nice? Sure, but that's not my benchmark for success. But again, it would be nice. The whole emotion thing or whatever. I just don't think they're going to give away any secrets. So I don't know how much you're going to see. And that's another reason why you just want to see execution, because this isn't going to be the same playbook that they're going to be running in 2 weeks against Washington. So this is going to be a different style. It's going to be a much more basic, much more easy to understand. Just like I said, these preseason games are basically scrimmages, man. So you just want to see the ball not hit the ground much, quarterback protected, obviously no injuries, basically. That's the biggest thing, really. To me, that should be number one on everybody's list, especially when the starters are out there. You want all of them to get in and get out of the game and be healthy, because especially at this point, it could mean you're missing maybe a couple games here when it's this close to the regular season. So you want to make sure that they're healthy enough for week one. And so I would say execution, and just getting out there healthy.
Simple plays, simple play calling, a lack of scripting, even more reason the run game has to produce. And I think move the football for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I don't think Baker's going to throw more than 6 passes all game. So you want to see them set the tone, and good execution will certainly do that. But ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Before we go, I am contractually obligated to tell you about our good friends over at Autograph. And listen, I'll tell you about this app for fun. I'll do it for free, to be honest with you. I have been having a ton of fun with the Autograph app, and you can too. Today's show is brought to you by Autograph, the app that curates the best content, tickets, and gear to help you fan to your full potential. As we all know, being a fan is a full-time job, so Autograph does the heavy lifting for you. From tickets for big matchups to breaking news, the Autograph app has curated content for fans of all things Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All the podcasts, articles, and game predictions you could ever want, including this very show. The new replay feature lets you get the day's news without the noise for when you need the too long didn't read to start your day. Use promo code BUCKS to download for free on Google Play or the Apple App Store today. That is promo code BUCKS, BUCS, for free at sign up, and help your favorite show. Find us on there as well. I Bleav both Evan and I set up on Autograph, and you can find all of our content, whether it is the podcast feed or the YouTube channel, over on the Autograph app. Download it today, where real fans get unreal rewards. Thank you again to Autograph for sponsoring the show. Find our show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at EvanNFL. At Bucs_Daily. You can find him on Twitter at EvanNFL, and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. Just when I think I've got this whole thing down to a T, I mess something up. Evan, what have you got on Bucs Nation this week?
Yeah, so obviously me and the entire Bucs Nation staff covering the game coming up, and of course, stay tuned, because like we mentioned earlier in the show, the Bucs are going to be making some cuts as well. So stay tuned to BucsNation.com. We'll have a full thread of potential cuts that they're making as they happen in real time. We'll be updating that thread, so stay tuned for that over on BucsNation.com.
Last but not least, you can find myself on Instagram and Twitter at Retticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. The Cannon Fire Podcast returns live Friday night as soon as that final preseason game is over. We will be live right here, youtube.com/Cannon Fire Podcast, breaking down the game, some of the top performers, some of the not so top performers, and everything in between. But that's just about going to do it for today's show. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off from my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will talk to you in the next one. Thank you, folks, for hanging out. Appreciate you listening. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, and as always, go Bucs.